The most ambitious ship launch of 2026 is in sea trials right now. Plus, one ship this week had 2 separate tragedies in the same 24-hour time span, and a crew spotted distress flares in the Gulf and ended up pulling a sailor and a very unexpected guest out of the water after 4 days adrift. Hi, I'm Melissa, a university professor who loves to cruise and who loves to talk ship. If you've been thinking about booking one of the first sailings on Legend of the Seas, here's where things stand. The ship is in sea trials right now, and that's a pretty cool cruise term. And what that means is that the gap between the ship is theoretical and the ship is real just closed. Legend of the Seas is Royal Caribbean's 3rd ship in the class, and it departed the Meyer Turku shipyard this week for 10 days of sea trials that cover 2,400 nautical miles, with more than 2,000 engineers on board. Now, their job is to stress test everything before passengers ever step aboard. And this is really cool. I never knew that this was the process. So it really is kind of interesting to see how the sausage or the cruise ship is made. July 2026 is the target for serviced entry. Now, I'll be honest, I've been paying attention to this one for a while, partly because I actually fly out tomorrow to go to Florida to get on Star of the Seas. So I'm loving Royal Caribbean's move toward these big, grandiose, awesome ships. I've sailed Utopia before, which is Oasis class, and that was one of my best cruise line experiences ever. So I am super pumped for my first Icon class experience. So I've heard nothing but amazing things. Everyone tells me I'm gonna love it. Stay tuned, because you know if I don't, I'm gonna talk ship about it, but I'm absolutely certain I will. So seeing more of this class of ship come to reality is really, really exciting. These are the largest cruise ships ever built. They run on liquefied natural gas, and the scale of what they carry, from private destination integration to passenger capacities, they make even the other bigger ships, the previous generation of bigger ships, start to feel more modest. Now, here's what most cruisers don't realize about sea trials, and actually I didn't know this either. This is not a shakedown cruise where the crew gets comfortable and they're chilling out and they're enjoying the amenities. Again, I mentioned there's engineers on board and they are at work. The engineers on board are pushing every system to its limits, things that it would never obviously reach in normal service, just to see if the ship can handle it. I'm talking running engines at full capacity, testing emergency protocols, checking HVAC and electrical systems, all the stuff under the hood. And the point is, obviously, to find those problems now in Northern European waters, not in July, when over 5,000 guests have checked in for their vacation. That matters because ships that come out of trials cleanly tend to launch cleanly, and the ones that don't, and that has happened, they tend to show it in the first few months. And the cruising community has a pretty good memory for that, and they know which ships have had a rocky start, and that makes them reluctant to be some of those early adopters and to book some of those early sailings. So those early signals are usually pretty readable. If the first week you're seeing online lots of posts about wonky air conditioning and service hiccups, and they chalk it up to, oh, well, the ship is just new, that is the beta test experience. If ships have a rocky start, we usually do hear about it. And I do love big, bright, fancy new, but I gotta say, I'm always not the person that wants to clamor to be the first on board. I actually would prefer other people be the guinea pigs and then work out any kinks, and then I'll get on board. Now, what this means for you, if you're considering booking, those first few sailings on any new ship, they are a different experience from year 2 or year 3, obviously. The crew, they're still learning the vessel. Systems that pass sea trials can still have quirks once actual service begins. And once actual service begins, there still can be some kinks that need to be worked out. So if you hear bad things online about that kind of thing, I would say chalk that up to it just being new. But if it's fundamental engine problems or air conditioning problems or things like that, that would give me pause. So I want to know, have you ever sailed a brand new ship in its first few weeks of service? I genuinely love to know whether you think it's worth it or not. Now, the sea trial timeline tells you the ship is coming. It's the demand numbers, though, that explain why the booking window is shorter than it looks. The cruise industry, it's a booming. It's on track to carry 50 million passengers a year by 2036. That is 11 million more than it carries today, and it has just grown year over year. Ships like Legend of the Seas are not being built for today's market. They're actually being built for that future market, which is even bigger than the one we have now, which is kind of hard to imagine. And the cruise lines that are not building toward that future, I suspect they're going to start having to scramble to keep up. Now, what that means for your timing is fairly direct. When capacity eventually catches up with that demand, the pricing and availability on the best early sailings, they're going to tend to look different than they do today. So the people that are waiting for prices to come down on these first sailings, well, you might be waiting for a really long time. So if you do want to book one of these big new to service ships, I would say book it as soon as you can. Don't wait around, because prices are probably not going to go down. Now, before you commit, here's what I would check. Compare the July and August sailings on Legend of the Seas against the fall departures, and that price difference will show you where demand is sitting in real time. But of course, there are differences too between summer and fall. But pay attention online to how these trials land. So while I'm not going to try to be one of the first people on board Legend of the Seas, I definitely do want to sail her. hopefully this year. So are you excited about Legend of the Seas? Let me know in the comments and let's talk ship. Now, there was something else that happened this week, and I'm not gonna skip it even though it's harder to cover than obviously an exciting, big, fancy, shiny, glossy new ship. I'm gonna include it because it's a reminder of something real about cruising that gets easy to lose sight of when we're talking about exciting new ships and amenities and things like that. Within just a 24-hour window this week, 2 passengers died on the same ship during the same sailing. The ship was Carnival Splendor. It was on a 4-night round trip out of Sydney with a stop in Moreton Island. And on April 17th, a 67-year-old woman from Tasmania, she died while snorkeling during the ship's call there. Emergency responders worked to revive her and they could not. A few hours later, in the early morning of April 18th, an elderly male passenger in his 70s was seen on surveillance footage climbing over a safety railing and entering the water. A search involving 6 vessels, helicopters, and a Challenger aircraft. It was conducted, but ultimately suspended. So we're talking 2 separate incidents, same ship, same sailing, within 24 hours. Now, the snorkeling story, it's a reminder that the risk does not come with the cruise line's logo on it. This was an independent activity, not a ship-sponsored excursion, which means that the lesson applies regardless of how you book your port time. And I'm not a big fan of cruise line excursions. I always say go independent unless you're a first-time cruiser or a super anxious cruiser or someone who is terrible about time management. But know, and of course, keep in mind that water activity at a port stop, it does carry real physical demands, especially for older travelers, and serious medical help is sometimes and often not nearby. So it's worth checking to make sure that your travel insurance covers medical evacuations from a port stop. And I will always beat this drum. If you don't have travel insurance, you gotta have it. I don't care if you're young, you're healthy, you're fit, you're the fittest fit of all the fit people in the world, you gotta have it. I don't care where you get it, who you get it, when you get it, how you get it, whatever, just get it. I have a guide for cruisers for travel insurance down at the bottom, so make sure you check that out. But one thing you do wanna make sure it covers, because this is the big one, and for me, the #1 reason why I am evangelical about having and carrying travel insurance is medical evacuation coverage, because that's the really, really expensive stuff that can financially wreck you. Now, the overboard incident, that's a different category entirely, and I will just leave those circumstances where they are. Now, what I will say is that the ship responded quickly. The vessel changed course within just 11 minutes of the alert, and the search effort was extensive. And the next sailing out of Sydney was delayed significantly, with check-in moved to around 8:30 p.m., and the ship ended up not departing until close to midnight. But in a lighter story, it doesn't sound light, but it actually has a really happy ending. You might assume a rescue story in the middle of the Gulf doesn't end well, but Carnival Legend recently proved otherwise. The ship was on a Western Caribbean sailing when the crew spotted emergency flares out on the water, reversed course, and deployed a tender into choppy water conditions. There they found a man whose sailboat had been disabled for 4 days. And this is where the story, I'm an animal person, I'm a cat lady, this is where the story gets really special. He wasn't alone. He had his cat with him. It was a black cat named Dahlia, and she made it on board too. And thankfully, both are fine. Passengers filmed the whole thing. It went everywhere, which really makes sense because this is a really good cruise story. We love these rescues, even when they're people, but we really love these rescues when there's a cute kitty involved. And it is important to note that cruise ships are legally required to respond to distress signals. And this is actually more common than you might think. So as someone who loves cruising, I gotta say, it's a nice side effect of cruising is that there's all these rescues that happen, which again, are not uncommon. Now let's talk Virgin Voyages. I love this cruise line and they're actually having a pretty amazing sale. They do it semi-annually. There's cabins as low as $99. They do go fast though. I'll drop my link below. If you do use my link, by the way, at no extra cost to you, I'll send you up to $50 of onboard credit. They call it Sailor Loot as a special thank you bonus. So click the link, check out the sale fares. If something strikes your fancy, you book it. I'll send you onboard credit and you'll experience an amazing cruise line. But when it comes to Virgin, they've long been known as a quintessentially Floridian cruise line, but not so much anymore. They've started to expand. Brilliant Lady is now operating out of Los Angeles with routes along the coast and Panama Canal transitions built into the schedule. And I did just do a Panama Canal cruise. I'll drop a link below to my content about Panama, so be sure to check that out. Now, I've sailed Virgin Voyages several times. I really do like this cruise line. There's a lot to like about it. It's adults only. There's no buffets. If you watch my channel, you know I despise cruise line buffets, or all buffets for that matter. And potlucks are even worse. Don't get me started on those. So Virgin does it differently. They don't have those. They don't have a main dining room. They tend to skew a little bit younger, even though it's kid-free and it's adults only. And they tend to be a little bit more foodie than the mainstream lines. And that's not criticism. That's all really good stuff that most cruisers really do like and appreciate. So these California itineraries, they're short enough to be a low commitment test run. So if you've been on the fence about Virgin, you've been thinking about it, you've heard about it, you might be thinking, it sounds interesting, but it's very different. And they actually pride themselves and intentionally make themselves different than other cruise lines, but you're not sure about that because you like the good old way of cruising. So if you want to kind of test drive Virgin, these are some sailings that are a good way to kind of test the waters, so to speak. But I will tell you, I personally really do love Virgin Voyages. It's not for everybody. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but I think they're pretty great. Now, if you have Alaska on the calendar this summer, and you haven't booked your excursions yet, do it now. I'm talking do it today. Start like researching, do it now. Also, by the way, I have an amazing private driver out of Seattle who can actually get you to the cruise terminal and back and do pit stops and give you a little tour of Seattle if you want. And a lot of times it's actually the same cost, if not cheaper than Uber if you have a group. So I'll drop his link down below as well. But when it comes to Alaska and Seattle, the Alaskan cruise season is opening huge. It's gonna open with 330 vessel calls, 2.1 million passengers expected through the season. Both are setting records. 11 ships will connect to shore power this year, which is a meaningful step for a market that has had some real friction, drama, and controversy around cruise environmental impact. But for cruisers on the ground, the record numbers mean that the ports will be obviously very, very busy. And a lot of these Alaskan cruise port locations, they're pretty small. And it's gonna be really busy at those popular stops where call volume is already pushing the edge. More ships in Alaska mean more competition for the same glacier treks, the same whale watching boats. Some are tenders, and then you gotta deal with that. And I do have a full series on Alaskan cruise port locations. I'll drop that down below. But seriously, if you've got Alaska as your bucket list this year or this summer, do your planning now before all the good stuff sells out.